That was a very poor choice of words. It's not how we do things. It's not how we operate.
In a rare move, Governor Maura Healey publicly rebuked her transportation secretary, Monica Tibbits-Nutt, over these comments about ways to raise more money for the MBTA.
I'm going to talk about tolling. I'm going to talk about charging TNCs more. I'm going to talk about potentially charging more for package deliveries, charging more for payroll tax, basically going after everybody who has money. And when I'm talking tolling, I'm talking at the borders.
That line about border tolls in particular has sparked a lot of coverage and a lot of outrage from both Republicans and some Democrats. So what does it mean for the efforts to fund the T? Former Massachusetts Transportation Secretary James Aloisi joins me now, along with Commonwealth Beacon editor Bruce Moll. Thank you both for being here, and good to see you. Bruce, you watched and wrote up Monica Tibbits-Nutt's speech to Walk Boston, Walk Massachusetts, the advocacy group, before anyone else was paying attention to this. What, to your eye, made it unusual? Was it the content of what she said, for example, saying she was looking for any possible way to raise revenue to fund the T, including border tolls, or was it the tone of how she said it, or was it both?
It was a little bit of both. Actually, the person that told me about the speech was talking about some other element that she had talked about, which was big to his personal project, the I-90 Alston project. Mm-hmm. And I started listening, and it was really her tone that she was very free and outgoing about it. And in the past, I've had a lot of dealings with her, watched her, and she seemed to be always fairly cautious about her dealings. But in front of this group, she seemed very comfortable and freewheeling and just letting it loose. And it was sort of how she said it at times that made you take note.
Just to give people a sense, you can go online and you can find the speech, but I want to drop in little portions of it to give people a sense of exactly what you're talking about. Let's take a quick look at a point in the speech where she talks about basically the power of the bully pulpit when you are transportation secretary, as she is.
The beauty of a microphone in all these different places, especially when it's being recorded, once I say it, it's there. And I have to deal with it. I will 100% use that as a weapon. Because once I say it, it is now a policy. I have now weighed in.
Jim Aloisi, when I was watching this, I found myself thinking, I can't remember the last time I saw any member of an administration speak this unguardedly in a public context. Is that, as someone who's done the job that Tibbits-Nutt is doing now, am I right to see the candor that Bruce described as unusual?
I think it's rare. But I'm not necessarily thinking it's a bad thing either. I've said in response to this that I think if what we get is the opposite of this, which is sort of secretaries, cabinet officials, public officials who sort of publicly do nothing but parrot a speech and give anodyne remarks that really don't tell us anything, then I don't think that's really helpful, right? I mean, it's interesting, Adam. We say we want transparency in government, but when we get transparency, then we react negatively to it. So, I think the secretary was in front of a friendly crowd, and she certainly seemed at ease and unfiltered and unguarded. And maybe it's a good thing that we actually have a window into how she thinks, because she is an important public official. It doesn't mean that everything she thinks will become policy, but it certainly is important to understand that. So I'm empathetic to her position, and I would hope that as a civic society that we would not beat up on people just because they've aired their views candidly. I mean, think about what that would mean.
Now, one of the tricky parts to what you're saying, there's the question of how it goes over with the public, there's the question of how it's reported in the media, but also the question of how it might be received by her boss, Maura Healey, the governor, who might not be happy if Tibbits-Nutt gets out ahead of her skis on matters of policy. I want to roll a statement from a MassDOT transportation spokesperson, MassDOT spokesperson, who said the secretary was conveying in this appearance that we need to have difficult conversations about how to make our transportation system work best for anyone. This task force, this transportation funding task force that Tibbits-Nutt leads, is in its early stages and no decisions have been made about its potential recommendations. Any proposals would be made in collaboration with the legislature and other stakeholders and would carefully consider any affordability and competitiveness implications. Bruce Mohl, that's, am I right to read that statement, listen to that statement and think, okay, this is the administration trying to say effectively Monica Tibbits-Nutt got way out ahead of where she should have been?
I think so. That came out on a Friday, and I think that was their way of sort of saying, you know, she's not unilaterally dictating anything or
what she says is not, in fact, policy.
That's right. That's right. But then you have to remember that on Monday, unprompted by, maybe prompted by the weekend's coverage, the governor then said, she doesn't speak for me on this toll issue. Just on the toll issue, she said at that point. So something shifted, I think, between the earlier statement that was done out of MassDOT but in coordination with the governor's office and then the governor's own statement.
She came out and said that on Monday, and then she also made an appearance on Radio Boston, on WBUR, in which she said this was a very poor choice of words. So the rebukes seemed to continue. I want to pull back just a little bit. Jim, can you give people a sense of what Monica Tibbits-Nutt's reputation is when it comes to transportation and thinking about transportation issues and making policy around transportation issues? Because that's an important bit of context here.
Her reputation, particularly among transit insiders and advocates, is actually quite strong, right? Monica was the vice chair of the MBTA's Fiscal Management and Control Board for its entire, I forget how long they were in place, 7 years. She knows the details and the facts about the MBTA inside and out. She's smart. She's tough, as you could see. And she has a set of values about sustainable mobility, about the role that transportation plays in our society. And they're generally values that I think are consensus values among most people in Metro Boston. Whether that came through in this kerfuffle or not is a question, but she's known to be, as I say, a sort of reliable ally for people who care about issues like mode shifting transportation, reducing climate emissions, providing more access to people equitably, all of these issues, which is what she talked about mostly in that speech, in her remarks. I think the content of those remarks, there's about 5 minutes out of a 45-minute speech where she talked about revenue. And of course, anytime you talk about revenue in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, you're bound to annoy some people. And she annoyed, why are we running away from a conversation about ideas just because, frankly, a fringe, what I consider a fringe right-wing anti-tax group set its hair on fire because they don't like the word tolls.
You're referring to Mass Fiscal, right? And it's, Mass Fiscal jumped on this. The conservative columnists at the Boston Herald jumped on this. It made the Daily Mail.
Right, exactly. So what we've seen here basically is a right-wing ideological response to what ought to be a carefully thought out conversation, which we need to have in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, about two things. How are we going to structurally repair the T's financial situation, which is something that is a short-term urgent requirement? And then how are we going to replace the gas tax when it becomes when it goes down to zero when everyone's driving an electric car? These
something that you championed back in the day as transportation secretary.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, and I've written about this in Commonwealth Beacon, and we know it's a conversation we need to have. The secretary, in her own way that day, unfiltered, was having part of that conversation.
She was having the conversation about revenue that you mentioned, but Bruce, I feel like it's worth highlighting that she was also having other conversations. I was struck by the way she described this ongoing project to get lead paint off the Tobin Bridge. Advocacy groups, one particular advocacy group has drawn attention to the fact that paint chips are falling in neighborhoods in Chelsea where this work is being done. We actually don't have a clip of Tibbits-Nutt addressing that, but I was struck at the sincerity with which she basically said the state has really dropped the ball here. We've gotten this wrong. I'm sorry. We're going to try to clean up the mess we've made, but this isn't okay, that this has happened, which was, again, it's just unusual to hear a state policymaker say, we dropped the ball here. And I'm paraphrasing, but I think that captures the spirit of it. She also made a comment about pickup trucks, which I think added fuel to the fire that we're talking about here. We do have a clip of that. She's basically saying that she's not a fan of Ford F-150s and other gargantuan pickup trucks that we're seeing on the road in increasing amounts. Let's take a look.
We can't price them high enough or put enough fees on them enough that's going to stop the type of person who wants to buy that car. And I am 100% passing judgment on someone who wants to drive basically an 18-wheeler as their personal car. We have no control over it.
That's one reason.
There's nothing we can do.
That's one reason that this took off the way it did, right? Because that added a sort of a culture war component to the overall conversation she was having.
Absolutely. And I think Jim's right that she's very well respected. She's also, I would say, a bit to the left in a lot of ways. She was a chief architect of the discounted fare for low-income riders on the T. It's been a passion of hers for a long time, and it became a passion of the governor's as well. What this whole thing sort of shows, though, is sort of where does the governor stand on this? You know, declaring this border toll issue off the table.
Yeah.
I talked to Senator Brendan Crichton, who's on this task force looking at new revenues, and the chair of the Transportation Committee, and he says,
task force that Tibbits-Nutt chairs.
That's right. And he said, I don't think it should be off the table. I think everything's got to be on the table when we're looking at this.
Well, I'm glad that you mentioned that, because that raises what I think is the most important question here. If you are a fan, as Jim, you are, of Tibbits-Nutt's progressive thinking when it comes to transportation issues, is this whole episode going to make it difficult for her to advance the sort of solutions that she would like to advance? And might it make it hard to advance ideas that would have been viable if she hadn't been caught on camera giving the kind of address that she gave the other day?
I mean, I think, we have to let's be candid and say this past week hasn't been a great week in terms of the ability of anyone, including the secretary, to sort of calmly advance a discussion on these issues. But I think it will pass. And it's not a discretionary conversation, Adam. I mean, it's just a necessary conversation. Personally, I would not have raised a topic like border tolls, because I think the solution, if you're going to price roads, we're going to have a regional Massachusetts road pricing system in place, not just at the border. People have to get used to the idea that because of the transition to clean energy vehicles, the gas tax will no longer be providing $800 million a year into the Highway Trust Fund in Massachusetts. We need a replacement. We don't need to do that tomorrow, but that's the conversation we need to have. And I think part of that conversation will end up being a regional, fair, equitable road pricing system that you can means test that. You can have it regionally fair so that Senator Spilka's concerns are allayed. And so, yeah, I think the conversation temporarily may have been set back, but it's not a conversation that we can avoid, and it's one that will have to be engaged in an earnest way over the next several years.
Bruce Small, sorry to interrupt you.
I just want to make a point. The urgent conversation that no one's talking about enough is what do we do with the MBTA's fiscal situation after the fiscal 2025? It will hit a fiscal cliff unless the legislature and the governor find new stable revenue sources for the T's operating budget. This is a critical short-term issue that we actually need to be addressing in the moment.
Bruce, you're going to get the last word here. Back in 2021, David Ismay, who was Governor Baker's undersecretary for climate, ended up resigning after he was caught on camera addressing advocates in Vermont. And the quote that I think really sort of did him in, made him tender his resignation, was he said the government needed to effectively break the will of ordinary men and women in order to get carbon emissions reduced. And he ended up resigning because the situation became untenable. Do you expect that Monica Tibbits-Nutt is going to be staying in her post, or is she in some sort of jeopardy moving forward, do you think?
Well, I'll give you I don't have a sound answer to that one, but I'll give you two things. One is, so she came in as the number 2 person under Healey in transportation, and her the secretary that she came in with had to leave under a very big cloud, and it appeared that Healey forced her out. So it would be very unusual, very difficult to now force a second one out so soon. But on the other hand, I was at the MBTA board meeting on Friday, and it's a board that Monica Tibbits-Nutt sits on. And everybody was there, but she came in via Zoom. And she voted a couple times, but otherwise said nothing. And maybe that's not a big deal, but they were having a discussion about revenues and what the political coalition that needs to be built to secure revenues.
Exactly the stuff we've been talking about
and
here.
She didn't weigh in or didn't say anything and said, I can do this. So it looked weird.
That's telling. I could imagine, and again, I'm speculating here, but in the moment being told or believing that you need to sort of pull back. Once you've had an episode like this, I think that could be a natural inclination, at least for a bit. We have to leave it there. Bruce, Mole, Jim, Aloisi, thank you both for talking this stuff through.
Thanks, Adam.